30s and died, I think, soon after. No, because it can go either way. It can go worse or better from where you are in the depth of nihilism of modernity, towards truth, or even away from the middle space into hell. But that being said, if you have authentic faith, nothing should be discounted. It is everything I've talked about before. It's everything I talked about before. So not to generate too much fear or anything, but it is, you have to seek the right thing, which is truth first. And that's another point, is that through all your efforts and the 3 oaths and also the concentration without effort, practice that you're doing, see the video, live stream I did last week on that, you're becoming more and more conscious. Everyone, don't forget to join the Greenwood Fellowship on my website. It's incredibly rewarding and beneficial to have a walled garden of other serious people on this path of initiation, to share experience and wisdom together as we all progress. You'll have access to membership videos, the second half of all lectures and streams, monthly think tanks with senior members, senior group streams on our YouTube, and soon in-person events, conferences and meetups. Please join the fellowship while you're also delving into the unconsciousness of sleep at the same time. You're becoming more conscious. You're active and passive at the same time. You're becoming more focused so you can see. And so the Lord and his angels don't bowl you over in electricity. They don't possess you. It's very rare that happens. It's done with your moral development in mind. Very rarely. So that's a good thing to consider. And we'll learn more about other stuff as we go on. They don't bowl you over, as I say here. And so all that preparation, the silence is here to hear the subtlety of what's going on. Another thing is that, as we'll see as we go on to the next slides, is that spiritual touch and the fire of emmaus, or the burning heart, as Father Seraphim Rose calls it, Tom Berg calls it the fire of Emmaus, rather. The road to Emmaus that the apostles saw Jesus on, and they find out later, did our hearts not burn? Which is a way of confirming it. And that fire of Emmaus, it comes with a certain truth and certainty to it. It's also activated through a loving heart, as Father Seraphim Rose says. So that's why you go through the forgiveness practices. And that's why Bergson, when he talks about intuition, he's talking about sympathy allows it to be possible. But that's why you're walking around blessing people as they go past, as I talked about with the forgiveness practice. You're healing yourself from the serpentine will to power that you're born into of modernity, so you can see deeper into the ground of reality, which turns out to be truth, but also love. The love is truth at the ground, willed good. So those are the 2 primary faculties. And as I said, I've got to repeat, I'm repeating it here. It takes time to demechanize and drill this idea into your head that you're always collaborating. You've got to purify yourself with the practices and the 3 O's before this stuff becomes possible. Don't seek it. That's not your goal. Your goal is to just be and do the practices like I talked about last week. And you're finding the truth. You want to meet the truth, who is he. Because if you don't seek the truth, what are you going to find? Illusion. And who is illusion? Ultimate separateness from God? Well, we've talked about him in other streams. Next. So, what are the spiritual faculties? Well, just as an overview or a summary, it's YHVH, Yahweh. I think I've talked about this in a stream or a video before, but we have to go through the senses. What is mystic touch? Yod. It is spiritual touch. It is touch, is used as it's analogous to touch because it has the immediacy of touch. You could consider it a second sense all over the body that you have. So you've got your primary feeling, but you also have this inner one too. But primarily, it's felt behind the eyes. Spiritual touch. Behind the eyes and behind the brow, which is also called the zone of silence. And that is something that becomes activated. Again, you don't try bring it about. It's something that just occurs in its proper time. Don't seek it. But that's the primary one. And then there's the Gnostic sense, which is Hey, which is the receptive part of the divine name. Yod Hey Vav Hey. Gnostic, bad word. Yes, the Gnostics are bad. Particularly bad if you don't have the spiritual sense of spiritual touch, which is connected with the fire of Emmaus, as we talked about already. If you don't have that and you have this gnosis on its own, or you can guess what the gnosis is secondary, isn't it? Right? You've got to have had the primary is the clue and the key. The secondary is, if you just have the secondary, what is it? It's derivative of something else, which means the first atom. Derivative of the first atom, haven't been purified yet. And so, what is that sense in general, just as understanding it in connection with authentic spiritual experience and the gravity? You could also consider spiritual touch like a gravity, too. But yeah, it's felt, it's immediate. Now, the Gnostic sense is something that it's the eyewitness. It's further back than that. You can see it as a reflection when you're experiencing the spiritual touch at the same time. Of that's the first receptive sort of synthesis of that visually when your eyes are closed during a prayer or practice. But how do we understand this as a becoming effect? We understand this as a becoming effect in that it is the general enlightenment and understanding, because understanding is actually this. It's deeper than all your intellectual ideas, though. It's the holistic knowledge that's granted to you. The truth begins to be granted to you, or the gift of black perfection. The truth is sent to you. Again, it's in that point of potentiality that is Yod, that is spiritual touch. The potentiality for all the rest of these senses rests. It's the first day of the creation. It's the last Lazarus miracle. The Alpha and the Omega. The whole potentiality is in that. And you don't see it at first, of course. It's uncreated light, the first one. But then the gnosis is this general enlightenment. This is how you notice it around the questions that you've been seeking slowly. That's what occurs. And it'll be shocking to you is that you'll go back to a book, the books of depth, because the books of depth have these 4 layers to them, right? Bible, Revelation, that sort of thing. You'll go back to books of depth and suddenly all these things will be understood that you didn't previously understand. Not just from progressing in life. No, it's because you've gone towards the truth. That's the Gnostic sense. Gnosis, the first inbringing of the uncreated light, you could call it. And so the next is the magical sense, which is connected to some of the other stuff we mentioned earlier. The magical sense you could call, or they call the Gnostic sense spiritual hearing, by the way. The magical sense is, or the miraculous sense, you could call it, is related to like that general health that we're talking about, but also a know-how. Because what is know-how? It's also a receiving that it is spiritual vision in the sense of the active imagination. That is a transparency over normal vision. You have a second sight, but it's transparently like a very, some people might have visual snow, a very subtle TV static that is transparent over vision, right? That is the very beginning. That's an affinity for this sort of thing. But from there, this active imagination develops and becomes more clear. But spiritual vision, but it's also the sense of the know-how and the miraculous, the magic sense of knowing how to do the stuff that you learn from Gnosis and Yod, Gnosis and Mysticism and spiritual touch, which is how to collaborate with grace. What's grace? Well, it's in an active passive state, it is allowing the unconscious to Move the breath, for instance. Speed up the breath, slow the breath down. Not your volition, though. How to lower yourself so grace can enter you and move. Mainly in the breath, though. That's what's practiced every day. That's the first developing of the magical or miraculous sense, is understanding how to collaborate with that first grace, which we'll talk about later, that you experience. That's the magic sense. And so I think I pretty much explained all that. That's a good way of putting it too. Is, of course, I wrote it and I'm like, yeah, good. Well said, Scott. No, thanks, Scott. These four senses, a way of putting it, is the spiritual touch is the roots of the tree. The Gnostic sense is the sap of the tree. The magic sense is the fruit of the tree. The Hermetic philosophical sense is the trunk of the tree. But let's explain the Hermetic philosophical sense. It's a sense of spiritual comprehension. What is the difference? Well, it's the synthesis of these other three, which includes the epistemic principle in a way, but also Hermetic philosophy is practical. It's a developing, comprehensive sight. And so let's talk about the charlatanry of the metaphysician, for instance. Well, look, there's a lot of philosophy people that probably watch this as well. It's okay. It's a great start. But not charlatan, really. Let's not be rude about that. Because, I mean, I love metaphysics. That's how I got towards this, through philosophy. But what is it fundamentally? Abstraction from deduction from the facts of existence. What is Hermetic philosophy, though? A perception from the facts of existence of beings, not laws and principles. A deduction, theirs is a deduction. This is why it's dead. The dead bark of the tree is philosophy, the dead bark. Theirs is a deduction from facts of nature to laws and principles, dead propositions, idea superstructure. This is a seeing through the facts, a perceiving. So comprehension, it's including vision, it's including gnosis, including spiritual touch. Seeing through the facts, the spiritual beings that those principles and laws are abstractions of. And we begin then to believe those principles and laws are actually what they are, and they're not. They're beings. And it's the sight of that, the interaction with that in totality, and seeing through those beings God himself. And so that sight also builds up over a very long period of time. And people like Rudolf Steiner, the mystics, monastics have it. The monastics don't talk about it so much because they don't want people to seek it, because that'll lead to delusion. Fair enough. Father Seraphim Rose is a great guide in that way. That's why I've mentioned him. And Valentin Tomberg, excellent guide too. And so spiritual comprehension, for me, that's a developing thing. It's becoming more and more clear as the transparency over vision, but also including the other things. And so in developing these things, you're always using the epistemic principle, to be certain. But you can see how that's the trunk of the tree. It's the whole thing. But metaphysics and ideas, where you start modernity, is the bark. It's the dead bark. We're getting towards the roots first, and then the synthesis of all the rest to build up a true trunk in connection with the divine, where we're supposed to be, with truth. So that's what they are. They are the spiritual faculties. And we'll go into detail about those. So let's talk a bit more, though, and talk about some of the stuff that St. Teresa talks about, which, again, of course, is connected with what the senses we've been talking about. So St. Teresa talks about two things: intellectual vision and, I think, spiritual vision. The first one is essentially Yod. It's essentially mystic touch, really. But she describes it as, what it is trans-subjective. It's from outside temporality. And that's why it's invisible. It's uncreated light, as the Orthodox call it. Doxa. It's connected with Doxa. But as St. Teresa describes it, is that she didn't see the Lord in the vision of the soul, which is the second one we just mentioned. She just knew with certainty that it was he and felt him. So this is an infused certainty that comes with the experience over time. And so that applies to spiritual touch, but it is what she calls intellectual vision. And so what's the second one? Well, that's extra subjective. So that's what is authentic of that is what has been brought inside already or comes in the potentiality of the first one, which you don't see. So what she's talking about is the immediacy directly sent into understanding as well. Like as you when you when you develop this, you begin to understand what understanding really is. And we don't have any depth of understanding in modernity at all. All the ideas you see on Twitter, all the intellectual arguments of the right, all this stuff, it's just jugglery. There might be some people, but I can't see any that get to the depths of things. The people that go to the depths of things, there are maybe a few, like three, let's say, two. But the people that are mystics, they're hidden too. I think there's a chap who on Twitter, he has a post that says the initiates are hidden. That's true, they are. But they're also, of course, in the monasteries, and that's why they tend not to talk about this stuff. Sarah from Rose, there's good warnings in there. That's the reason why, is to stop people from falling into the delusion. Why they don't. Though there are books about it, and so this is for a particular people of a kind of vocation that need to come this way. That's why. And I've been guided to share it anyway. So that's why I'm sharing it. Okay. And so that spiritual vision, the other one is extra subjective. It's the eyewitness, the certainty of an eyewitness. It's spiritual vision, it's spiritual hearing. And that's in the sense that it's heard in the senses of the soul. So you hear it in your head, you hear it rather than externally. Although sometimes you can hear it via the senses as well, but very rarely. You don't hear someone's voice in the actual sense of hearing, but you might hear very, very subtle rumbling before grace, which will seem like or tinnitus seems like it's normal hearing too. It's not just you speaking in your mind, actually. But those things are projections from the truth that has already been brought in. That's part of the magic sense too, is that it's something that once you've been purifying yourself becomes possible. You don't it's not something that just happens. It's over time. You begin with the sense of the spiritual touch, and anything. That's why you're not trying to bring about, or you're not paying much attention to begin with to anything visual or anything like that you see. What's primary is spiritual touch. Even your attendings, like anything Gnostic or anything visual, while you're doing your practice or whatnot, is always secondary in terms of attention. It's the mystic touch that's the primary. That is merely a water that's reflecting it, if that makes sense. So you don't start attending just the visual. The mystic touch becomes, anyway. That's something for later when you develop this stuff. But that is those two things. Now, what's the fire of Emmaus? That is the synthesis of these two things. It's another sense you could call it, that becomes possible because of all this in a miraculous way, because none of this happens without the collaboration of the Lord. And you must remember that. And it's hard. You've got to keep reminding yourself every time. Even I used to remind myself before every morning prayer and practice of the concentration without effort with prayer. I would remind myself that I'm not bringing this about, and of course you're engaged with the icons to help with that, because you have this thing in modernity where you want to bring it about with your will. That's why this is about the passive active. It's about without effort, you see. It's not the Übermensch. The Übermensch is like all of these Eastern religions. It ends up being a specialization of the old Adam, a specialization of the faculties post-fall, rather than the new Adam, which comes from the future. They are going to the prenatal state with their practices and that and their religions. They're not. Since Christ, the future has become available as a thing that can become a fact of your experience, as a thing that can be an existential fact, as I've called it before. It's not an existential fact for you now, but it can become your access to the future through the stuff that we're talking about. And so the fire of Emmaus is that. It's the synthesis of the other two, which makes heart, because the Lord is the synthesis of death and life. He's human and God. That's why God is love, willed good, and has always been so. But he had to come here and incarnate. And so the burning heart is this infused certainty at the same time as it's known as something sent as an object. Fire of Emmaus. It's this certainty of the burning heart in love. And you'll experience that. And we'll talk about what the first inklings of it feel like. So the joy and sorrow, true humanity and true divinity at the same time. And so we've basically talked about that in general, what we've talked about there. And so let's move on to the next one. Okay. Now we're going to get on to the phenomena in terms of me talking about the experience directly. We've sort of expanded theoretically what these different senses are. And so the first primary sense, the second primary sense is the fire of Emmaus, like we're talking about, which is the synthesis. The first primary, of course, is spiritual touch, like we talked about. What is this? Well, it's felt as movement. It has the immediacy of touch. Here, I'm going to give you some analogies to help you when you're, again, these are just to help you once, don't seek them. It's to help you confirm once they come about in collaboration, not to try seek. You're seeking the truth. But you'll have to endlessly remind yourself when you do it. You just do, don't try, as Yoda said when you're doing the practices. You just do, don't try in prayer. Now, you might notice them like a rumbling, but a felt rumbling in these areas I've talked about behind the eyes, but also can be as the second inner physical sense all over the body. A rumbling, a breathing, a rhythmic breathing, which is something that you find later, which has the addition in also felt as well, the breathing of love, which we're nested in at the very ground of the total bottom of our psyche, which is Logos.
So a big thank you to all our members, contributors, producers, who you see here in this plaque of honor. Without your financial help, this fellowship wouldn't be possible at all.